We welcome you to the Learning Forward podcast, Season 10, Episode 16. I am Anvesha, your meet and greet podcast host at My Good School. History narrates tales of courageous, brave, patriotic men who sacrificed their necessities to fight for a more significant cause. Still, while highlighting the men down the ages, we often undermine the women of the past who had performed more dangerous deeds and fought for causes which ameliorated the lives of later women. In our podcast, Dr. Deepti Mehrotra, author of Her Stories, Indian Women Down the Ages. Dr. Deepti is one of those rare people who has been vociferous about the lives of Indian women. She has paid these marginalized ladies tremendous respect by extensively writing about their rebellions and difficulties. Would you like to speak a few words about your book, life, and love for history, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you, Anvesha, for that introduction. And this book, as you've mentioned, is about women of the past. It's called Her Stories, Indian Women Down the Ages, Thinkers, Workers, Rebels, Queens. So I've covered a very wide range of women. As you can see, they were right from being actually different castes, different classes, different religions, different parts of the country. So most of the states of the country are covered. The women are rebels, all of them are rebels, all the women here. So they were going against the established patriarchy, the established expectations from women. And this has meaning for us today. It has meaning for women today and for men today, for girls and for boys. Because we are all, it's about gender, concerns all of us, those who have more power in their hands and those who are still repressed and suppressed. So in looking at stories of rebellious women, incredible stories women who have fought and who have managed to achieve something. Many of these are writers, many of these have written verses that are still sung by, for instance, Janabai in Maharashtra or Andal in Tamil. So these are women who are remembered, their works. Mirabai is also here. So what I'm looking at is not necessarily well-known women or women who are not well-known. I'm looking at the inner meaning of their stories. I'm trying to understand what they faced and how they battled it in their personal lives. What kind of a human being was Mirabai or Gulbadan, the first woman historian that we know in India? Gulbadan was the first 16th century. She wrote a history. I read that history. We can all read it. It's easily available in English. It is so very interesting, because Gulbadan's history has the inner stories of empire, of the Mughal Empire. Abul Fazl wrote the external history. This is the history of kings and wars. Gulbadan also writes about kings and wars. Her father was Babur, so her brother was Humayun, her a nephew was Akbar, and she was there through all the three reigns of these three Mughal emperors. So Gulbadan writes about the empire from the perspective of an insider, and she writes about personalities, about human beings, about wars, but also about picnics. She writes about relationships. There are so many people in Gulbadan's history, so many people, and it becomes so interesting, much more interesting than the histories that are usually told, which are only of kings and wars. So what I beg to kind of submit is that this is actually very interesting history. This is completing history. It is a completion of the histories we are fed, the official histories. and therefore meaningful for all of us to understand what is our nation, what is India. Yeah, because India was also the women who rebelled against and these were the queens, but they were also the working women. There were many working women in this Unaka Abave of Karnataka or Nangeli of Kerala. Janabai herself, so well known, her abhangas are still sung in Maharashtra by lakhs of people. She was a maid servant all her life. So these stories, how did she manage as a maid servant to be a poet of such merit? You know, what is her poetry? You know, each of these characters, when you go into it, you find them subverting the patriarchy very powerfully. So that's what I'm getting at, because we need to do that today as well. The patriarchy is very powerful today as well. And these invisible women are actually, they mirror our own invisibility very often.
Thank you, ma'am. It's excellent having you here. All the women narrated in the tale are a rebel in a unique sense, simply because they refused to keep quiet, fought against the unjust practices of society, and denied the secondary roles. Ma'am, what was the process that went behind writing this beautiful novel? How did you discover women whose names were unheard of and recollect their contributions, which were till now forgotten?
Thank you, Anvisha. This is actually something that over the years, maybe decades, it's been close to my heart to discover invisible women who have, because they have said so much and done so much, all the more there's a backlash and they are repressed very often in official histories. So, but you will find their evidence because many of them wrote, somewhere people are still singing them. Somewhere they're sanitized, the image is sanitized, like Mirabai you'll see wearing white and so on. But you also have many different images of Mirabai. Her dancing on the streets, her singing on the streets, her challenging the priesthood in Mathura, in Vrindavan, and so on, and challenging the whole Rajput, the patriarchy. You know, that. So when you look at something like Mirabai is well known, so I'm just in the short, to bring out some of the reasons why I chose somebody like Mirabai here, although she's so well known. There's the story that she died in the temple in Gujarat. We all know this kind of story, that Mirabai finally passed away. She merged with Krishna's statue in the temple. Now, did she merge with Krishna's statue? We are also asking that question in today's scientific age. And there is an alternative version, which is that she was so well known by then, she was so influential by then, that from Chittorgarh, there was a Rajput contingent who came, Rajput and Brahmin perhaps, and to take her back to Chittorgarh. Yeah, there is also this history written somewhere. So I haven't created new histories. I have been very true to evidence or to sources, but I have looked at alternative sources which are available to say that sounds possible, that sounds plausible, that actually they came to take her back and she committed suicide maybe. So there is the story that she was actually jumped into the sea there, or so there is. And if you look at another story in this book, much less known, a woman called Kanhopatra, also a singer, also a saint poet like Mirabai in Maharashtra. She did, that story is very clear that she died in the temple of Pandharpur because the nobility, a particular nobleman had his eyes on her and was coming to kidnap her and take her away. And there was nobody and nothing who could prevent it. So I have actually, it's the perspective I come with, which is a feminist historiographic perspective. It is, this is a feminist scholarship. We have very, very, well-researched feminist sociology, feminist history, etc., etc. And I'm in that line because it's the perspective that differs. When one looks at queens, one doesn't immediately think that they are ambitious, as over-ambitious, ruthless, as many of the official histories just label queens as ambitious, over-ambitious, ruthless. So, and I can go into examples of that. So to wrap up answering your question, I chose women who are, many of them already well known. Like there's Lakshmi Bai here. Everybody in the country knows her. She's the one woman everybody knows. But I also look at Jhalkari Bai with her. Jhalkari Bai was a Kori caste, that's a weaver caste, a Dalit caste woman who actually in the local histories, she led the army, the women's army, that she helped Rani Lakshmi Bai put together the women's army. And so there are accounts of that in the folk stories, the folk tales, the folk songs of the area. And these were gathered by no less a personage than Mahashweta Devi. She went to that area and researched it. So one looks at different, and others now are researching it, Dalit historiography. So when I say feminist historiography, this is looking at history from those who have not been looked at, and that includes the Dalits, that includes the working class, that includes maybe minority religions. So so this is how I chose. They could have been, from a few thousand others that one could have chosen. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Women in history were indeed extraordinary, but there was a standard tie to them which made them ordinary simultaneously. These women came from diversified backgrounds, yet they beautifully blended into a plethora of power. Ma'am, how were you inspired to write these stories, and what set off that spark for you?
Yeah, that's a very interesting kind of area that you've touched. They were ordinary and extraordinary. So if you look at this in terms of a private-public divide, the public is usually what is considered worthy of historical record. The private is considered something that is to be kept out of history. And private is, however, the domain where women come in much more. Now, the way that I look at it, and many others today look at it, is that the private and the public are both open to interrogation, are both open to investigation. And the ordinary woman or the extraordinary woman, almost all, 99% perhaps, are invested still, even if they're public figures doing extraordinary things. They are also still invested in the household, in children, in being mothers or in being aunts, and they're also invested in being daughters, of course, before that. They're also invested in perhaps running households or running palaces or, like Jahanara but they were also interested in what is called the private domain. And they had important roles to play there. So they continue to be ordinary in the sense they also, even if it's a very, very powerful queen like Jahanara or Harka Begum or Durga or Rani Abakka in Puduland, they continue to, or Jindan of Punjab, they continue to still go through some of those, I said, the investment in household roles and what are called the feminine roles, but also invested in or also victims to or subject to violations, subject to being, a slander. So somebody as powerful as Dida, Rani Dida of Kashmir, she ruled for about 50 years in Kashmir, about 1,000 years ago. She was an excellent queen that she brought stability to the kingdom, to the region, but she is called overambitious, she's called ruthless, she's called, there is a rumor that she was single, she had a long-standing affair with one of her ministers called Tunga. So this thing of a woman having affairs because she is, in the public eye, women's personal life, desires, sexualities, being subject to public scrutiny. I mean, if you look at kings, invariably they have multiple wives, they have multiple concubines, they have multiple, women in their life. No historian has asked any question about that. You show me a historian, an official historian who has asked question that. But here is one woman And you find this for Rani Jindan of Punjab also. They became queens or regents because their sons were minor, only because their husbands died. Okay, so they are single. Now they're single, so they're all the more subject to this kind of calumny, this kind of slander. And the British did this to Rani Jindan. They said she is this and she is that and she has this affair. Rani Jindan was this incredible woman. I mean, it's like I can't believe these stories sometimes, but it's only when I read them that I say, oh my, I mean, how do we not know this? That Rani Jindan, the youngest queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, she fought the Brits. She fought like a lioness. She fought like a tiger. They had to drag her away from the Lahore palace and put her into a fort. And even from that fort, she, because there were her maids that she had, there were her retinue. She was this queen. They let her have her maids. They let her have her priest come in and meet her. And through that, she kept rebellion alive, So this is the 1850s, early 1850s, 1840s almost. And so she was part of the lead up to 1857. They dragged her away from that Punjab fort and brought her to the fort of Chunar, 1,000 kilometers away. Fort of Chunar is at Banaras, and kept her there under heavy surveillance. It's all described, the layers of guards and so on, and one British officer who had to come and see her every day. She escaped out of that. It's like an unbelievable story how she escaped. She dressed as her tailor woman and she went out, and she dressed as she called herself Parvati. She dressed in ordinary clothes and she walked up to Kathmandu, up to Nepal. There were a lot of pilgrims going up to Nepal from that Banaras side, and she did that. That's recorded history because she was then she went to the Rana, the king of Nepal, and she was provided a residence because they had relations with Punjab. They knew, they respected that. So there's so many stories there. From there, she kept up rebellion, She had been separated from, when you say ordinary, these are her extraordinary activities. The ordinary was she was a mother. Her 8-year-old son, Dalip, was snatched away from her. The Brits put him in a British couple's care, and then he was taken to England. And he knew nothing of his Sikh background. His hair were cut. He didn't know any Gurbani, any Punjabi. And she later, to wind up this story, this is to give you an illustration of, what it is that why it's important to know these women's stories, or because they're so invisible and yet they're so important. She from Nepal kept fighting and up to 18. The British gave her many kind of strictures that you can't continue. They said to the Rana of Nepal, don't give her refuge. So there was all this going on. And so is coming and meeting her. She's still, she was in touch with prisoners in Allahabad. She was, okay. Now, 1857 happens, 1857-58. There is the defeat of the Indian forces, the First War of Independence, what was called the Sepoy Mutiny. She realizes that we are defeated. There's no point carrying on. She's also frail. She's aging. She's very unwell. She then agrees to the British. They've been saying for years, you stop your activities, you can come back and live in India, never in Punjab. You can never go to the Punjab, but you can come and live in India. She said, okay, I will not do any more rebellious activity. I want to meet my son. Look at the story. It's true. I want to meet my son. And he came from England. And she was brought to Calcutta. They met in Calcutta. She was shocked to see that he doesn't have a pagri. She thought he would be like that, and she sailed back with him to England, where his home was, where he had a wife and children and a home. And she lived for another year or so. She taught him the Gurbani. She taught him the history of the Punjab. He became a rebel in his own way. He couldn't manage to do anything very much, but he was rebellious. And his daughter Sophia is a very well-known suffragist and rebel. She actually brought her grandmother's ashes from Sophia Dalip Singh, brought her grandmother's ashes Rani Jindan's ashes from England to India, and they're now in the Lahore fort, either in Lahore with Ranjit Singh's. So I can know these two stories, and Anvesha, they just gripped me. The more I go into it, and I can't believe that we don't know all this. This should be in the history books. There should be movies about it. There should be, real facts are so much more interesting than this, concocted histories of Razia Begum and all her love affairs. You look at the real stuff. Yes, there is love affairs, but look at the real. What was that love affair? What was that woman? What was that human being? The metal and steel there as well.
Yes, ma'am. If we say life is all about stories, and the fact that you have spread these stories far and beyond is the wonderful aspect of it. So now we have Jugjeev sir and Rishona here to ask questions. I hand it over to Rishona.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
It has been a pleasure listening to you today. Your thoughts are indeed quite inspirational and fascinating. There should be more information on these stories, and we should definitely know more about their lives. According to statistics, nearly 2.4 billion women don't have the same rights as men do. This is indeed a serious issue. As an advisor of the civil organizations and as an author, what changes do you wish to bring about to improve this situation?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question, and the answer is so huge. I'll try and say it in 2 or 3 minutes. What changes do we need? What changes can we all work towards? Because it needs a lot of collective thinking and collective work, and many different people doing many different action for change on different fronts. So there are many fronts. There is the front of protest and dissent on the roads, and that is also very important. I think there's this leading protest going on right now in the country, which we're all aware of. So if we look at violence against women, there are lakhs of women suffering it. You look at the figures, there is now some even the census or the family health data or so on, and NHFS are collecting these. You have huge numbers, a huge percentage of women saying that, yes, I have suffered even domestic violence. It's not like 2%, it's closer to a few, maybe 50%, 60%. I don't have the figures on hand, but it is closer to that. And figures for, of course, when you unpack what is violence against women and the different, the rapes or the emotional violence or the economic violence. Okay, so now a lot of the stories that I have told through history are the women have faced violation. They face violence of different kinds, and they have spoken up about it. They have protested. They have protested through their songs. Also, they have written about it. They have taken very extraordinary actions against it. I mean, there are several of the women in this actually are nuns or saints, and in a sense, it's very clear from their poetry, like the Buddhist nuns of 2,500 years ago, the Buddhist nuns who wrote the first collection of women's poetry in this country and perhaps in the world, the Terigathas, the songs of the elderly nuns, is about 2,500 years old. And you have these songs, they're available to us in, they were sung in Pali, they're available to us in English. And you have women's, a woman Metta writing that after being beaten, having left her home because of the hunger and the pots and pans that were empty, and about the husband who was violent. Yeah. So you have some of the same dynamics, or similar, let me say, never the same dynamics going on over centuries, over millennia. So women have found their alternative spaces, say, or made there. The Buddha didn't allow women to come in initially into that space, which was a kind of refuge and haven that women kept going and saying, no, open up this space for us. We want to be living like this. We don't want to be in this domestic space and this worldly space. We want to be living free, and we want to be living a spiritual life and being with a life where we're not violated, a life where we can our wisdom can emerge, and we can feel light and free and happy. And it was because of that whole story of Gautami's going the third time. That was his milk mother and aunt, his father's second wife also, his mother's sister also. The Buddha's mother had died soon after his birth, so Gautami was his mother's sister and second wife and a wife of his father, and so on, and his milk mother. So she came thrice, and the third time he said, okay, because I respect you so much, you're my mother, you have done so much for me. And that opened the door for, the Buddhist stories say 500 women joined right after she joined. Yeah. And then you have somebody that, so many interesting women. You have this Amrapali joining sometime later, who was, we could think of her as a Tavaif, but Ganika it was called. And her joining, her poetry is with us, her gifting her mansions, because the Ganikas could own independent property, unlike the Grihastha women. They owned property, they were intellectuals, they knew poetry, they could converse, they knew the politics of this. So she had a lot of property, independently owned. She gifted all that, and to the Buddhist. So what we need to do to change things is a very complicated question, but we need to look at these histories also, because change is not superficial. The change we need has to go very deep, because the injustice and the inequalities go very deep. They're in our structures and they're in our mindsets as well. So how do we change all that? So we can begin at so many different fronts. As I said, we begin with education. Very important what you all are doing, working with school children, because that's where the textbooks should include a lot of this. Because rather than, for instance, we say reform movements began in the 19th century, everybody will say Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Why do we not know what Pandita Ramabai did? Why do we not say Savitri Bai Phule? There is no reason for not saying Savitri Bai Phule, Pandita Ramabai, and others like Rukaiya Sekhawat Hussain. They were all the same, 19th century up to early 20th. The reforms they brought about for gender, for women, were actually more far-reaching and went deeper than or they were at least equally important. They not only said, for instance, widow remarriage, they said widows can have a life. So Pandita Ramabai had, and Savitri Bai Phule in the mid-19th century, had homes where women and girls were educated, so they could take up careers and stand on their own feet. Many became teachers, many became various things. So they didn't only have remarriage as an option. Yeah. So there's something going on where even the histories are androcentric. Androcentric meaning with a male perspective. The histories are written from the same patriarchal point of view. So you blot out those histories. So bringing these histories out is actually a rebellious act in itself. And reading them and spreading them in itself. There are many other, I'll just kind of, in a way, kind of a bullet point of other things we need to do for change. We need to work at the police, we need to work at law and order, we need to work at the political level, we need to have more women in parliament, in power. You have women in panchayats, we need to see that these women have the actual power. And you need to be able to enforce the laws we have. You need to be able to go by the Constitution of India, for instance, on its Article 15, etc. You need to be actually ensure that there are real clear moves towards equality. You need to see that if there's an act like POCSO, prevention of child sexual abuse, that act is actually implemented in practice? And these are very tough questions. We're seeing that, on the huge national stage, POXO is not, etc. And there's all kinds of things going on, which it seems that patriarchy mixed with power, mixed with communal thinking, mixed with, various illusions of what India should be, a kind of idea of Indian culture, which is very skewed. All this coming together has made a very dangerous and potent mix. It's all that we need to be able to keep impacting and so the intellectual level is important, along with the practical fighting level, along with being able to also, and just the last point here is being able to look after ourselves. This is very important, this is often neglected by activists. We need to pay a lot of attention to self-care. As women, as human beings, everybody, but here since I'm talking of what women can do to change things, to change gender, we need to be able to say that, okay, live a life which is raising all these pertinent questions, taking action, but also not getting burnt out. And also saying that my life is also important, and can I also develop calm and patience, because I need it for myself also. I can't always be angry, because that is not good for me. Anger is justified, but it's not good for me to always have that anger in oneself. So to be able to keep that anger, but to be also have a calm, tranquil kind of space inside, and to be able to look after other people, and very importantly, other women as well, often neglected.
Thank you, Deepti. Let me just come in here quickly. You've covered a really vast range of topics, and thank you for that. In the introduction to your book, you have said that Jindan Kaur is your favorite, is your favorite story in this book, and you also said that you're writing a sequel to this book, which obviously will cover the last couple of hundred years, I guess. So, can you tell us who is your favorite in the next book that you're going to with your writing?
Oh, that's a very tough question, because it's very difficult to have favorites. Even when I look at, that I've written that Jindan is my favorite, I'm like, but she's not always my favorite. Sometimes there's somebody else there. Rani Abakka
okay, you can
is my
tell us about somebody else.
Yeah. In the last 100 years. I would say, just off the top of my head, somebody like Jagdan Bai. Jagdan Bai was known to be a singer, and she was from a Tawayaf category, and she also made films. Do we know that she made some of the earliest films? And that her daughter Nargis was there as a little child in her films, and those films are social commentaries. Those films are very interesting. I mean, I don't know if they're available anymore, but reading the little things that are available, she sang very, very powerfully and beautifully. So the journey of somebody like this, and there are a number of other singers that I find extremely interesting, and theatre artists. So I would include them. Somebody like Gulab Bai, who was the first woman in the Nautanki genre. So Nautanki was actual stories like Raja Harishchandra or Harishchandra Taramati, sometimes they call it, or so those stories which were done in so many different genres throughout the country, and which also became the first silent film was Harishchandra. And so on. So she was Taramati, that is the wife of Harish. She acted as, she was the first woman to act as Taramati in the Nautanki genre. The Nautanki was the most popular genre in the whole North Indian belt from the late 19th century to the mid 20th century, to around the 1950s, 60s. Very, very popular genre. Like lakhs of people would see it. They would come, there would be huge crowds. So she was a superstar. She was very well known, Gulab Bai. the first woman to come in, because earlier boys and men acted as the women's role. So her coming into the Mohanlal's company, and then, as a 12-year-old girl, and then she got the Padma Shri at the end of her career. How do you do that? I can't do that. You can't do that. How do you do that? She had the talent. She developed the talent. They learned classical singing. She also looked after her safety her brothers were bouncers, her father. So the whole histories are very fascinating, because you're reading the histories of the communities as well. The Bedia community that she came for. It's all stuff that we should know, And the Bedias are known as a community of sex workers today, that the men are pimps and the women are sex workers. But that is true in some spots, but they are so much more. They were the first, the women are dancers, the men were, they sing beautifully. They, now, the way development has gone, so many of these communities are pauperized. So they take to various means of livelihood, which may not be their traditional means of livelihood. But so I would look at people like this. I would also look at more well-known people. Mashrita Devi is a great favorite of mine, and somebody like Irom Sharmila, or somebody like the Gaura Devi, who led the Chipko movement in Uttarakhand. Ordinary village woman who actually started the first Chipko action, which was to hug the trees and save them from being cut, with a bunch of other what are called illiterate. They were not. They were, but the action they took is just far more wise and sensible than what we highly educated people are doing to the environment. We are destroying it, and they're trying to save it. So all these issues are what these stories, what make the stories of these women very interesting and very important.
Thank you, Jagjeev sir, and thank you, Rishona. Also, thanks to you, Deepti ma'am, for being here with us. Her stories, Indian Women Down the Ages, is not just a novel, but a keepsake where the tales and stories of Indian women are preserved. It is a way to hear those unheard of and appreciate their efforts for women at large. The best way to move forward is to look back. We can draw inspiration from these ladies of the past who selflessly gave away themselves to rebel against causes that hindered the development of women. An ode to all these Indian women down the ages. We come to the end of our podcast. Comment below and let us know if you like our podcast. If you want to be a part of similar podcasts, join us. We hope to meet you again soon. That's all for us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are here at my good school. Things here are so cool. Together we learn, together we create, together we meditate. Everyone is welcome. Teachers here are awesome. We learn good values, we learn many skills. We soar above the hills. Let's shout it out, hey, let's all be proud, hey, hats off to my good school. Just what we need, hey, for us to succeed, hey, are all here in my good school.